supposed to hurt. Right? If it didn't, it wasn't worthwhile. And it is worthwhile. I don't care. Right? I don't care. It ain't what we wanted. But that don't make it not worthwhile. That don't make every one of these souls out here, every one of these hearts, every one of these bleats in this chain not worthwhile. So y'all be there right now. You want to talk about is that chain strong? You be there right now for each other the right way. You be there right now for each other the right way. We have had a phenomenal year. A phenomenal year. And I refuse to let you guys feel any other way but good about it. I refuse it. In the name of Jesus, I refuse it. You hear me? I rebuke that mess. You guys are better. You guys are better. We are better. And I won't take nobody else for y'all. I don't care about none of that other. This is our team. This is our group. And it hurts, but be in it together. Touch somebody. Let's go. Let's go.
Good evening and welcome to a special edition of the RO Sports Show that we're calling the Richmond Raider Wrap-Up. I am your host, Matt Harrelson, alongside with me, Dion Cranford. Dion, thanks for joining us as usual. And unfortunately, the Richmond Raiders season is over as far as football. It, of course, was a great season. I know that the players look at it as a success. Of course, them as well as the fans, we wanted to get to the state championship and potentially win one. But let's talk about Friday's game. Now, I know that you were living it up down in the Caribbean, which a little jealous, but I know that, of course, that wasn't going to stop you from checking out some highlights, of course, from the Richmond Observer, and I'm sure you've got stats here to look at. But what was your takeaway from the game on Friday?
Well, I mean, here's the thing about, the problem with seasons like this is if I were to go back to June or July and say this team would win 11 games, It would beat Butler, they'd win a conference title, they'd end the losing streak to Scotland, I think a lot of people would be a lot happier. The problem is once you get on that roller coaster and you win and win and win and win, it almost becomes an expectation. And I think a lot of people feel a little bit deflated, but I don't think really anybody's really disappointed. As far as the game goes, I don't want them to lose, but at the same time, I feel like the right team, at least that night, probably won. I don't think the Raiders executed well. From a lot of the video I saw, I think there was a lot of low snaps. There were a lot of, just different issues at the line of scrimmage. They killed us on that little short, what was that little screen pass?
Yeah.
It seemed to be almost the same play over and over. And you get those games where I don't think Myers Park was really that much better than Richmond, but I think they were good in the areas they needed to be to win that ball game. Because it would not surprise me at all to see Myers Park get blasted by Vance Friday. I mean, it's just one of those things. Another thing people have to also realize is that 6 of the top 10 teams in the state were in that one quarter of the bracket.
Wow.
When you got teams like Myers Park and Butler falling out in the second round, and I mean, no offense, but you got Pinecrest, Scotland 71st still playing, it just shows how
lopsided a little bit.
It is a little bit. And so, I mean, that was a beast in itself to actually win in that bracket. I don't think the Raiders fell short. I think they met and probably exceeded most of the expectations we had at the beginning of the year. So as far as Friday night goes, it was just they just got beat by a team that played really well.
They did. And, I do want to mention we started at the very top of the show with that very passionate speech that Coach Till gave to the team after the game. And I was telling you before we started taping, Russell was filming. I was standing beside him. It almost brought me to tears. Just the emotion, of course, that was surrounding the players and all the family members that were behind them. And, I talked to Coach after the game, and obviously it was a very emotional time. But, of course, he's very proud of his team, as you would expect him to. Of course, they've got some things they're going to need to work on in the offseason because, they didn't win the state championship, and there's always room for improvement. But getting back to the game, a reading on the Richmond Observer, Kyle's article that the Raiders scored a season low in points during the loss to the Mustangs.
Mm-hmm.
And one observation that I had, and I want to get your opinion on it, Caleb Hood has played phenomenal all year long. Hasn't seemed like a sophomore. However, it seemed to me Friday that he kind of came back to earth a little bit, if you will. It seems like in the beginning of the game there were a few passes that came out of his hand, a little wobbly, some that he wished he could take back. Do you think maybe that might have messed with his psyche a little bit, because he seemed to pull the ball down and run a lot more thereafter?
Well, I think so, that too. And like I mentioned, that when I was watching the film, and I don't know how it kind of played out the whole game, but I noticed there were several very low snaps, and that's really going to affect with the way your quarterback plays. And I also noticed there was a couple of plays where Caleb actually got brought down from behind.
Right.
So he's. I mean, we even said this last year, that boy's got ice in his veins. I mean, he'll stand in that pocket and he'll find something. But when your pocket's collapsing on you a little bit quicker than you're used to, and you really and you're a 10th grader,
Right.
Once again we got to face the facts. They're young, but I think he still had over 100 yards passing. I mean, he didn't have a terrible game, but again, this team has been so deep in terms of players that have been really getting in there and making plays. You can't really take a team that's used all that depth and all that versatility and then put it on one man's shoulders. Especially in that kind of game environment. I don't think putting this all on Caleb Hood is really fair, because of course he struggled, but then again he hasn't really had to carry all that weight himself this season, and I think he probably did a little more in that game than he used to. So.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about it all season long about all the different weapons that he's had around him, including losing Malik Stanback at the beginning of the year. Of course, we saw him in that clip as well, not handling it well. Being a senior, I completely understand that. Richmond tallied 296 yards of total offense. Hood was 13 of 24 for 121 yards. So as I mentioned, not his best game. Not a terrible game, though. He also scrambled for 87 yards on 19 attempts and scored his one touchdown with his legs. So as I was mentioning, it felt like he was just running a lot more than usual. I don't know if that was statistically the case. Of course, Jaheim Covington added 77 yards to Richmond's 175 total rushing yards on only 14 attempts, though. Do you think maybe they should have fed Covington more? Because it also seemed like Myers Park defense kind of swallowed us up on the line a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the line seemed to be an issue in that game. And one thing I marked in my notes is Richmond was only 2 of 12 on third down conversions, and that's something they've actually had a lot of success in this year, especially in third and short situations. But Caleb Hood, Jaheim Covington would always find ways to pick up those first downs, and a lot of times they would convert third downs. A lot of times they would convert third downs on the ground rather than the pass. So that could have been a big area where maybe they just couldn't get if they're having trouble at the line, maybe they just couldn't get the space they needed to convert those plays. But the third down conversion was really a big factor here. Another one was just simply number of possessions. I mean, they only had 4 possessions in the entire second half, which when you're playing comeback, that's not good.
It's very difficult.
And we talked about it before the show, but they cut the possession they cut it to a 2-possession game at the start of the third quarter with that long drive for the touchdown, and then attempted that onside kick. And who knows, had they got that, that could have been the momentum change. It could have really swung a different direction. But then again, I mean, like I said, you really I think the few possessions in the second half were really a difference maker, and the third down conversions were really a difference maker in this game.
Yeah, and let's talk about that onside kick, because we've got some footage that we want to put up showing up close and personal. I know that initially the refs called it, that it was our ball, then they overturned it, and as you can see here, I know there's a scramble there, but if running it back and looking at it, and if Russell can pause it right there when the scramble starts, it seems like we got that ball back. Now, look, I don't want this to be a sour grape scenario where we blame it on the refs, but that was a critical turning point, wasn't it?
It was. I mean, like I said, that after Richmond scored a touchdown, had they gotten that, that could have really shifted the momentum in Richmond's favor and maybe sparked a little bit of a comeback. Once again, I mean, did the officials rule that Myers Park got the ball? Or because, I mean, I was under the impression that they ruled that it was touched before it went 10 yards.
You could be right. The feeling I got, as you can see here on the monitor there, the ball is loose. I felt like they called it for us and then overturned it. But there was a lot of commotion going on, so you could be right on that. But again, looking at it, it seems like the Richmond player was able to reach in, as you can see here, reach in underneath the Mustang player and pull that ball back in. But the Zebras have the final say, and unfortunately, it went the Mustangs' way.
Well, and if I'm not mistaken, didn't one of the Raider players actually come up holding the ball?
I think so.
After this whole scrum ended, I think one of the Raider players actually had it. But again, I've said this every year because we've had games like this where the officials have really made these calls that could.
And right there, you see the player coming up with the ball. So. And again, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but just because Raider player came out with the ball also doesn't mean we got it. But it seems like the evidence was a little overwhelming that the Raiders should have had that ball.
And I totally agree. And the problem with situations like this is, it does feel kind of like you don't want the officials to make calls that are going to really change the direction of the game. But at the same time, when you give up 4 consecutive touchdowns and you put the game in the officials' hands, it's really hard to blame the officials at that point because, if this had been a one-possession game, this had been a one-touchdown, and had that onside kick maybe been late in the fourth quarter where
Right.
Yeah, but again, it does hurt the momentum of the game. But at the same time, if you put the game in the officials' hands and you make them decide it for you, you're rolling the dice. It could go the wrong way.
And obviously, with the final score being 37-14, it obviously wasn't a one-possession game. There were a lot of moments in there where Richmond should have capitalized, didn't capitalize, whatever the case may be. But let's talk about the Raiders' defense, which all year long has really killed it. I think overall they had 4 shutouts, I think, during the season.
Yeah.
And then on Friday they gave up 403 yards of total offense to the Mustangs. Of course, Drake May, their Myers Park quarterback, the brother of Luke May, which is about the only props I'll give this kid, he had 321 passing yards on 15 of 25 passing. So talk about Richmond's defense for a minute. Was May just able to shred them up? Was it busted coverage? What do you think?
I think Myers Park came in with a good game plan. Like I said, they had those two receivers run those kind of shallow routes, and one of them was almost always open.
Mm-hmm.
And it really bailed out Myers Park out of some situations where I think we probably could have gotten to the quarterback, but there always seemed to be that one guy open. And again, we've seen that happen in the past. This is nothing new. We've seen teams just come in and just have the right game plan and play the right game. Myers Park executed well. With the exception of the block punt in the first game, they really didn't make a whole lot of mistakes. And and unfortunately, Richmond probably didn't play their cleanest game. And again, this isn't a bad loss. So I don't want the Richmond fans to think, oh gosh, this was falling short. It wasn't falling short. This was a loss to a very good team. It was a loss to a top 10 team.
Yeah, 12-1 team.
Yeah, so this isn't a bad loss. This is just 2 really good teams, and somebody had to come out on the losing end of it.
Yep, you were right, unfortunately. So let's look forward. Obviously, the season is now over, but we've talked about several times about how high this Raider team's ceiling is, especially with all these super sophomores that we've talked about. So in your opinion, moving into next year, I know we've got a whole offseason to look forward to first, but what do you expect for the Raiders moving towards 2019?
Just keep improving. This was a huge step in the right direction this season. Just keep improving. Keep that conference title here in Richmond County. Keep those wins coming. There's going to be a change in the schedule. I think the contracts, I guess I'll call it, with Reagan and Wake Forest are over with. I don't know if they'll keep Butler. I think we played Butler a little bit longer than the others. But,
we have.
So we don't really know who we're going to see, the quality of teams we're going to see. I expect to see improvements at Pinecrest because they've had some good players move up from the young. I expect to see improvements at 71st. I don't expect to see those teams go away. Not really sure what to see from Scotland. So the big question mark now is, yes, I think Richmond will improve, but what are they going to see? What are they going to face? Who are they going to play? Because like it or not, that loss against Wake Forest at the beginning of the year, the game against Butler, those are the games that really got them to where they got to. Had you not played those strong teams, even teams like Pine Forest, had you not played those strong teams early, they probably wouldn't have won 11 games. So it's good to keep the opposition strong. So it's going to be interesting to see what the schedule looks like.
And then my final question for you before we wrap up this special. I know I've asked you this right after the regular season, but taking it all into account, preseason, regular season, and now the postseason, who's your MVP this year?
That is a good question. I guess you got to go with Caleb. I mean, it's hard. To me, I think it's a toss up between Caleb and Jaheim Covington.
Yeah.
You could kind of argue either point. You know what? I'll go with Jaheim Covington because he's a junior, right?
Yeah.
So I'll give it to the more senior player.
elder statesman.
I'll give it to him since he'll be a senior next year. Maybe he can carry that MVP into next year and make a big season out of it.
Absolutely. And although the season is over, it was still a successful season, and the future is still very bright for the Richmond Raider varsity football team and for head coach Brian Till, and of course all of the Richmond Raider fans and Richmond County in general. So that's going to do it for the RO Sports Show special Richmond Raider wrap-up. Dion Cranford, Matt Harrelson, we'll see you again next season as we get prepared for the 2019 Richmond Raider football season.